In 1386, two Frenchmen fought a duel in the field outside Paris, each seeking to bury his blade in other's body. One combatant had been accused of raping the other's wife, a charge he denied. After an initial verdict of innocence was returned, the accuser demanded a trial by combat. The judgment was now in God's hand. Who would be chosen to die? Duels were used to resolve judicial matters, putting the verdict to God's judgment. In the winter of 1386, a French noblewoman by the name of Margaret de Courageous found herself at the center of a criminal case that electrified Paris, captivating the king and culminated in blood being spilled before the enormous crowd. Earlier that year, Margaret's husband, the knight Jean de Courageous, had accused his former friend Jacques Lecris of raping Margaret. After failing to get justice at the court, Jean beseeched the king for justice. He made a formal process of appeal or challenging against the Jacques Lecris and requested the right to prove the justice of his cause in combat. This was the famous trial by combat, sometimes also known as judicial battle. After an investigation, the parliament granted his right to Courageous, and he met Lecris in specially constructed list a space for tournaments at Saint Martin de Champs. The crowd was huge and included King Charles VI himself. De Courageous and Lecris took special oath before the king, including a promise that they did not have any unfair or magical advantages. Each man placed his sole reliance on the justice of his cause, his body, his horse, and his arms. The fight itself was brutal. The two men charged at one another with their lances, butchered each other at war horse, and took to the ground in bitter and bloody combat. They were quite literally fighting for their lives. If De Courageous won, he would apparently prove the justice of his cause, and Lecris would be found guilty and hanged. But if De Courageous lost, Lecris' protestation of innocence would be proven true, and De Courageous would be guilty of perjury, a capital offense. And Margaret would also be found guilty of perjury and be burnt alive. Trial by combat was a form of ordeal. The idea was the case would be decided by the judgment of God. Jean de Courageous was not satisfied with the initial court verdict and was requesting the opportunity to put the case before the God. God would apparently manifest the innocence and guilty by protecting the innocent. Jean de Courageous and Jacques Lecris fought their case before a vast crowd under King Charles VI. The battle was drawn out, bloody and spectacular. It finished when De Courageous pulled out his visor of Lecris and fatally stabbed him. Lecris' body was dragged from the blood-soaked field and hanged on a gibbet. De Courageous was rewarded for his courage, vindicating the righteousness of his cause. As for his wife Margaret, she stood firm, having risked her reputation and her life in order to speak out the truth. Trial by combat has ancient origins. Indeed, medieval people often refer to the story of David and Goliath, in which God worked a miracle and the righteousness of David's cause was proven by his incredible victory over the giant. In medieval Europe, trial by combat resurfaced in Germanic law. The first reference comes in the Burgundian decree by the king Gundobad in 502 AD. The practice spread widely across Europe thereafter. It is tempting to see the medieval trial by combat as a prime example of our predecessors' irrationality. But there was a rationale at work also. Some cases simply cannot be proven one way or the other. In a society that believed in the power of God over all things, it was reasonable to put intricate cases to divine judgment. Trial by combat got abolished in 16th century in Italy, in 1819 in England, in 10 July 1547 in France, but as far as America is concerned, trial by combat had never formally been abolished. So in 2020, a man named David Zachary Ostrom requested a trial by combat in response to the custody and property dispute with his ex-wife over their children. Following Ostrom requesting trial by combat, court ordered to have a sanity test by him and was temporarily restricted from parenting rights. Upon successfully clearing his sanity test, Ostrom's parenting time was restored. Ostrom has since admitted that he initially made the request for trial by combat in order to attract media attention to this case. Thanks.